Okie dokie. So if you've watched any of my videos, it is typically impossible for you to do so without me shoving my website down your throat, be it for actual in-game damage numbers or a comparison. And I know quite a few of you have been confused that despite how often I talk about my website, I've never actually tried to direct you guys to it. And the reason for that is basically I wanted to add more features. I didn't think it was ready yet. I wanted to add X, Y, and Z, and I basically wanted to get the calc to a point where it could bridge the gap in build crafting experience between people who just started the game, just got out of normal mode and found out that normal mode had nothing to do with the actual game, and then turbo fucking build crafting nerds like myself. And I believe we are to that point. There's obviously still a lot that I want to add and do, and I might discuss a few of those things as we go. Let's talk about how you can use this to suit your needs, because that's the whole idea. You can use this, and if you want to know what reactor rule is better, you don't have to wonder anymore. You can check. If you want to know if fucking a super common thing people keep asking these days is whether power increase is a better mod for you, you can check in your specific scenario, because it's different for everyone. Depending on what you're going to do, what mods you're using, whether it's actually better for you, you can check that. When you pop open the website, this is typically what you're going to be greeted with. On the left side, we have a stats column. In the middle, we have a skill breakdown for whichever skill you want to click on. There's different tabs for weapon, enemy, team buffs, comparisons. And then on the right, we have our different selections. These can just be clicked on to go whichever one you want. Component, reactor, character. And then we have our mod selections down below. When it comes to inputs though, I'll just clarify this right now. Later, I'll probably make it so they are a bit more user-friendly, but right now they are all text filtered inputs. So Haley is shown right here, but if you remove Haley from the text box, you now have the full list. So for shits, I'll pick SMO. I'll go to my reactor. I'll choose fire and then tech, and you'll see that that's actually populating the bonuses correctly over in the stats column. The ammo identifier type isn't actually that important. It gets updated automatically based on whichever weapon you input in the weapon tab. The ultimate toggle just means, are you using an ultimate reactor? Because if not, it will actually adjust the weapon optimization bonus to 40% instead of 60%. And then condition just means, are you meeting the actual condition to begin with? On the reactor, the level is going to default to 2. You can obviously reach up to level 5 now with Season 2. However, if you disable ultimate, obviously rare reactors can't go beyond level 2, so the calculator will adjust it automatically. Components can have their stats input just like reactors, and then when it comes to mods, we have, and I'll just pop over here just to show this, depending on your Transcendent mod, so if I type in Creative Explosion here for SMO, it does actually modify the skill displays actively. The sub-attack module doesn't actually do anything in the calculator right now, it's kind of there for the sake of completeness. The melee ones will probably do stuff later. I'll just put in long distance maneuvering for now, because frankly, what else are you using? And then on the other mods, I had Shield Specialist in from earlier, but I can do Fire Specialist, and you will see that the damage numbers down here are going to be increased because it is a fire skill. Whenever a skill does damage, it's going to show the modifier percent. This is the sum total, by the way. So if I go in and add, this is a fusion, so I'll add fusion, focus on fusion, the modifier actually increases. And this is actually kind of nice because in-game, base power modifiers will show, but type power modifiers never show. That's a complaint for another time. The in-game UI is a fuckfest. But more or less, any mods you want to input, I have them. What in the fuck is wrong with me? Just remember that the first slot is for the Transcendent mod, and the second slot is for the sub-attack. If there is ever a bonus on a skill, that needs to be toggled or set. So on Time Bomb, we have SMO's bomb count, and we can specify that, and it actually modifies it. Or on Creative Explosion, we have the Narcissism buff, or if Creative isn't there, then it's the Madness buff. And in this case, we need to toggle it on to actually see it populate in the skill stats. And if you're ever confused on where a buff is coming from, that's part of what the stats column is for. So if I go over to the power optimization stat, it tells me what it is, how it factors into the math, but you'll notice down there at the bottom, it says what selections that I actually have on can contribute to that. The reactor weapon match shows up because I have the condition met. If I turn that off, you'll notice it disappears. And then it also says that I have the skill for Arcade Explosion that's factoring in. So you never have to be confused about what's coming from where and how much. Something you'll notice though as you go about using the calculator is that we get accurate in-game damage numbers that will match up. But the only reason we can do this is because we actually give you the ability in the enemy tab to specify exactly which enemy you're fighting. It's always going to default to Devourer because that is everyone's favorite punching bag. But as of the update I'll be pushing to the site, I actually have info on every single boss in the game now, including normal mode bosses. So if you ever want accurate numbers, and this is extremely important for comparisons later, you need to choose the boss you're actually fighting against. Creative Explosion on a regular hit was doing about 1,100,000, but if I go and choose Infernal Walker, that drops all the way down to just 225,000, and that's because Infernal Walker has 6.8 fucking million fire resistance. That is why the enemy selection is crucial, because we not only factor in all the resistances, but we also factor in crit resistances, and that is extremely important when comparing different modules, because the value of crit is diminished greatly depending on the crit resistance of the enemy. And on firearms, which we're going to talk about next, the value of attribute mods or crit mods versus weak point mods can be greatly diminished by that as well. After selecting an enemy, though, you do have an additional option to choose a part that you target. And that's because, as you see down here on the list, every different part of the enemy has a different physical type. So crush, burst, pierce, those things you completely forgot about at the start of the game, they do actually matter quite a lot. If you're confused on that, go watch my weapon damage video, because we also have different weak point modifiers depending on the part that you're targeting. For skills, this doesn't matter at all, unless it's Zenith, I guess, or maybe Glay. But for weapons, this is very, very important. Player count doesn't actually do anything right now, because if you modify the player count, it doesn't actually modify enemy resistances, it just modifies their health amount. I just wanted this so that way you could see basically how much damage you should be doing based on how many players you have in your team. So if I change the slider on Infernal, it pumps his HP clear the fuck up. Time spent immobile is a slider that determines the benefit of dangerous ambush immobile. So if I type in ambush here, and this is basically a way to specify if you shoot 10 shots, how many of those shots are actually landing on the boss when it's staggered, when you're going to get the ambush immobile benefit. So if only 50% hit, then you would go down and choose 50, and you're going to slide that to whatever, and it will directly modify the bonus of that mod specifically, because that mod is fucking weird. The crit resist sliders are going to be automatically adjusted by whichever enemy you select in the calculator, but if you're ever wanting to find a specific breakpoint at which a mod is better than the other, you can slide these to manual values. Just remember that if you swap bosses again, they will be adjusted again. Weak point hit rate is very similar to ambush uptime for dangerous ambush, but for weapons. And this does apply to skill weapons like Zenith as well. So it's basically how many shots are you actually going to land in a percentage that actually land on the weak point that you're targeting via your target part versus the body. Next up is the team tab, and this is where if you have team members with specific buffs, you would enter them in. Right now, I only have Luna buffs calculated, but they could actively contribute to your skill power. So I just toggled on Luna's red, it's not enhanced, and if I go over to base power ratio, you can see that team buffs is factoring in. Later, I'll add things like Sharon's battlesuit melting rounds, I'll add shit like fucking Enduring Legacy's fire resist debuff, Nzystra's devotion defense debuff. So I'm sorry for this being sparsely populated at the moment. Next up though is the weapon tab, and just like the skill tab, it's pretty self-explanatory. You just go in, enter in your weapon. I'll do Sonic co-op for shits. I'll be adding a lot more weapons later. The 4 slots down below the weapon are obviously your different weapon options. You can do whatever you'd like. Typically you'll see firearm attack, bonus against Colossus, weak point damage, and critical hit damage. And just like reactors or component substats, when you first enter them in, they always assume the highest value. It populates the graph based on damage per shot over time. So I have a shot count of 27 due to the Slayer set giving me a magazine bonus, and if I cursor over any of the bullet points here, it gives me the time it was fired, the fire rate when it was fired, the delay to the next shot, and then the actual damage information, same as down below. And if you actually click on one of these points, it will populate that specific shot down below as well. But if you're on mobile or you don't feel like hovering over a point to click it, you could just use these arrows to switch between them. Kind of like skill damage, it will show you instead the attack value instead of modifier, and then a damage on a regular hit, a crit hit, and then averaged against your crit rate and crit damage. But there are still more things to show here, like if we do attribute attack and I do chill enhancement to add a base value of chill, then it will add another row to display the same stuff, because firearm damage is never going to be one convenient happy number that is modified the exact same way. It has different resistances. Physical attack gets reduced by defense on the enemy you're targeting, whereas attribute attack is always going to be reduced by the attribute resistance of the enemy. At the moment on the UI, I have the code set for it, I just need to go edit it on the UI later, but where I'm missing inputs for reload factors or cycle factors, because the graph will always show you every shot in a single magazine, but there are some weapons like Wave of Light that get a 2-second bonus after reloading. And so later, it's not going to be visible in this video, but you're going to have the option to specify what window of time you want to measure for a single cycle, how many times you want to cycle, and then are you reloading in the middle of a cycle or are you reloading at the end of your magazine? So this way we can factor for weird bonuses like Wave of Light. But we also do a lot of different stuff. The line is uniform and flat right now, but that's because the damage per shot never changes. But what if we add in a scaling buff like Mental Focus? This obviously very much changes the math. And this is something that Mental Focus is typically something very hard to visualize for players. Or if we do something like fucking Real Life Fighter or Sharp Precision Shot, where it's pretty much fucking impossible for a normal person without some mega fucking spreadsheet to chart this out and get an actual value of what this mod brings to the table. But with this, it charts it out, it maps out where exactly the bonuses should apply and when, based on what you have selected. And with the cycle options that I'll be adding to the UI later, this means we're going to basically simulate a perfect number for you instead of guessing. And part of why that is cool is because we now have the comparison function. And right now I'll just give an example on skills, I guess. Let's go over to SMO and add in, I don't know, Gladiator. This is obviously a fucking worthless mod. But on the abilities, we'll say that I'm going to target an ability. We also have the option to target stats. So if I wanted to target like max HP, I can see that Fire Specialist obviously isn't helping my max HP, which is the stat we're now targeting. And so it gives me an option between every single other mod I have available. It will list them out in highest to lowest, relative comparisons for which mods are better or worse than the mod you have selected. So Fire Specialist, Stim Accelerant is a 234% HP increase. Whereas if I go to the bottom, something like Overwhelming Shield is obviously going to be a 99% HP decrease. But it doesn't have to be just stats. We can choose ability aspects. So Time Bomb, I can either target the average damage per hit of a single bomb, or I can target the sum total average damage of all the bombs together. And this will be modified by how many bombs I specified earlier. So if I specify 5, that's going to change. I'll specify 11 for now. Fire Specialist obviously is a very good mod for SMO. There aren't going to be many good options for that. And so we can see that if we want to target Fire Specialist, everything is going to be a damage loss. But if I target Gladiator, which is fucking worthless, it's very hard not to have mods that are better than that. And we can see that Fire Amplification is a better mod here. And this is how you can see if you are on a character and you're curious if crit is better or worse. We can put in skill insights, concentration, and then we can go in and target those crit mods. And we can see that Fire Amplification on SMO is going to be a 32% damage increase over skill insight. But you have to remember that these comparisons are always relative to exactly what you have equipped, what your settings are, whether you've enabled crits or not. And so because I didn't have crits enabled, I just enabled them, and that greatly changes the comparison. So instead of being a 32% damage increase, we can see that it is actually a 17.43% damage increase, because now we're actually using crits. So you do have to have a general idea of what you're doing. You can't just blindly go in, slap things in for shits and giggles. And to wrap up weapons, there can be weapons that have unique abilities. Sonic Co-op is obviously a fucking joke of a scout rifle that you should never use. But if you use something like Blue Beetle. I actually don't know why the weapon graph isn't populating with this. That's an error that I will have to fix. But the Blue Beetle obviously has a unique ability where when casting a fusion skill, you get a bonus crit rate. And so this is right here. It's kind of like abilities that have toggles. So kind of like the Madness buff like we discussed earlier. Blue Beetle has the crit rate buff and you can toggle that off or on. It'll always default to on, by the way. But as I toggle it, you can see the crit rate off to the left in the stat column does actually get modified. Something getting added to the site in the update that I'll push after this video is bullet graphs are new overall, but we're also making it so they can apply to unique abilities like Zenith. And if you watched my Haley Abyss video that I put out just the other day, you saw this get used in there. And with that is the ability to target on comparisons abilities that rely on weapon mods. So if we do that and go to Zenith, we can see weapon mods based on our equipped weapon, and we're seeing the damage that comes out of Zenith from that. And that's how I can use this on Infernal Walker to go and compare. We have rifling reinforcement. Obviously, half aiming is going to be a sneeze better if you're actually getting 100% weak point hit rate. However, if you watch that video, we know that Perforator's purpose basically is to make it so you can always hit body shots. It doesn't fucking matter. So we're going to specify a 20% weak point hit rate on Perforator. Actually, that's probably generous. say 15. And then we will go down and target. Since charge amplification is better right now, it's always going to tell us what the loss is. But if I go and change that mod to bullet integration, and then compare that instead, then that's how you can see that charge amplification is a damage gain. Now, the difference is very minimal on Perforator. In the video, we showed that there was a very large difference on snipers, but that, again, just circles back to what I said before. The comparisons are based exactly on what you have and your settings. They're always going to be relative and very much dependent on all of that. So do not forget to specify everything you are using. The enemy you're fighting, the part you're shooting at, because if I shoot the body, that obviously changes the value again. Because now if we're shooting the body, we have a 0% weak point hit rate. Nothing is hitting a weak point. Weak point mods no longer factor. And not on the video that you could see at least. There is one more option to target weapon mods. I just haven't added it on the current build, but you will be able to compare weapon mods as well. And due to our ability to graph out things like sharp precision shot, you're actually going to get accurate comparisons and see the value of mods that you would never really consider using normally, especially on something like Afterglow Sword. For shits and giggles, we'll say that, and then we have weak point expansion. Uh-oh. What's it doing there? Oh, it's because I'm choosing. Oh, God. Okay. Oh, small heart attack. I thought I broke it. So, random side note, guys. Weak point expansion has a condition built in that you need to be targeting a weak point. Go figure. But because I specified body earlier, it actually disables it in the graph. So, if I go back and choose the heatsink, as we should be, now it populates. Oh. Small heart attack, because weak point expansion has a 10-second cooldown, so the first shot obviously triggers it at 0 seconds. Later in the magazine, right after 10 seconds has passed, the cooldown is finished and we shoot again. That is very hard for people, unless you have some mega fucking turbo spreadsheet shit, to actually give you the true value of. But we're able to do that and give the exact value in that comparison. And then real quick, to wrap up calculator usage, you'll notice, now obviously this isn't going to be the exact URL that you guys see. This is just my local version. But on your guys' links, you're going to see this long ass string, and this is called a query string. But basically, this is my way of getting around not having servers. So what you select in here is saved to the URL. Almost everything, I should say. So your stats, the exact values you enter in on your reactors, your components, that stuff, your reactor level, your weapon substat values and their selections, what mods you have on your weapon, all that shit. Those are all saved here. But the enemy that you have selected, the part that you have selected, if you have a buff that's active, it's not going to save to the URL. So when you do refresh the page, it's going to keep everything you have, but say I disable the skill crit rate bonus from Blue Beetle. If I refresh, you'll notice it pops back on, because it defaults to be on. But just so you know, the build is saved for the most part completely to the URL. So if you ever want to save or share a link to someone, share it to me for the purposes of a bug report, that kind of stuff, you can always use the URL. And then I think the only thing left to really talk about is the boss stats page. If you go up under resources, you see the boss data option. If you pull that up, this is where it's going to bring you. This is where basically I have parsed stats from in-game, just about everything you would want to know. This is a much more detailed view of what you could already see on the enemy tab, because not only do we show the health, the shield, all that same stuff as before, along with a player count slider again, but we also show the crit chance of the enemy, the crit damage, their penetration factor, how much HP recovery they have, at what interval, all that stuff. So if you're ever confused and want to know exactly what a boss has, and this is something that will come very much in handy later, Stein, I believe you're watching this, you and I are going to try and figure out exactly how Frenzy works in terms of building the gauge. There are a lot of stats in here that are going to be very relevant to that stuff. But that's kind of it. I understand if people get overwhelmed, but I promise you this is all not nearly as complicated as it seems to be on a user front, at least. The coding is a nightmare. But if you ever have questions, go ahead and ask in the comments. Join my Discord, let me know. If you have bugs, please join my Discord and let me know. I can't fix a bug that I don't know about. So if you're experiencing an issue, please, for the love of God, just tell me. And if you have things you want added that I don't have, let me know as well. I am open to discuss anything you guys want me to add. I just can't promise that they're all possible.